Part 1. She said, "My parents are visiting." I told them I'm dating someone. I said, "Am I the someone?" I could feel the shift in the air before I saw it. It was the smallest of details, but it struck me immediately. The vase, 3 inches to the left of where it usually sat, off-center on the entry table. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I wasn't like most people. I made my living on precision, flush joints, level surfaces, the exact tension needed to keep heavy oak shelves from tearing drywall. I noticed things, little things. The faint creak of the 3rd floorboard in the hallway, the rhythm of Delilah Long's morning routine. Every day at 7 a.m., she refreshed the water in that vase. Usually it was filled with wildflowers or something bright orange, their scent like rain and earth. And every morning she centered the vase perfectly beneath the mirror, as if she had a quiet ritual with the room. But today, the vase was crooked, the water murky. And the silence, it felt heavier than usual. By 8 a.m., there should have been music drifting from her apartment across the hall, a little jazz to start the day. Today, there was nothing. I shifted my toolbox in my hand, the weight familiar, worn smooth from years of use. The stillness of the building made my stomach tighten. It felt like something was off, like I was about to walk into something I couldn't fix with a hammer. I was the guy who fixed the little things, the rotting window frames, the broken stairs when Xavier Moore, the landlord, was too cheap to hire a contractor. I was the guy who nodded as I passed people in the hallway, a familiar face, helpful when needed. But I wasn't the guy who knocked on doors because a vase was a little crooked. But then I heard it, a crash. It wasn't glass breaking, it was heavier, the dull, sickening thud of wood cracking, and then a sharp cry, a sound so filled with panic that it jolted me into motion. Without thinking, I dropped my toolbox, the metal clanging against the hardwood floor, and crossed the 3 steps to her door. I didn't knock. I tried the handle. It was locked. I slammed my hand against the wood, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. "Delilah! I'm fine," she called back, her voice breathless, too quick. "Everything's fine, Travis. Don't come in." I listened harder, my ear pressed to the door. There was no sign of calm, no steadiness in her voice. It sounded like the weight of something heavy was coming down on her, like the sound of timber cracking under pressure. "I heard a crash," I said, leaning closer. "Open the door." "I can't," she said, her voice trembling. "If I open it, the shelf is going to fall. I'm holding it up right now." "The vase? The one worth about $400? It's going to shatter." I let out a breath, feeling the tightness in my chest ease just slightly. "I've got this." I pulled the master key Moore had given me years ago, the one he gave me when I rebuilt the back deck. I shoved it into the lock, turning the knob. "I'm coming in," I said, already stepping inside before she could protest. The apartment smelled like lavender and panic. For a brief moment, it looked almost like any other morning. Delilah standing by the entry table, adjusting the orange berry stems in the jar. She always did that every morning. A quiet routine, calming, like the world wasn't falling apart outside. But today, the oak shelving unit behind her had tipped forward. It was about to collapse. I didn't waste a second. "Jesus," I muttered, stepping into the room and pushing the door shut behind me. I didn't care if she didn't want me there. This wasn't a time to ask permission. "Don't look at me," Delilah gasped, her arms trembling as she held the weight of the shelf. "Just help me find something to prop it up." I didn't look for a book, a wedge, anything. I crossed the room, bending down, and placed my hands on the uprights just above her head. The weight was too much for one person, but we had to do this together. "On 3, I said, my voice steady despite the situation. "You move, I push. Ready?" She nodded, biting her lip as sweat beaded on her temple. 1. I counted under my breath. 2, 3, quote. She slid out from under the shelf, scrambling sideways. I gritted my teeth and shoved the unit back against the wall. It groaned loudly, but I didn't let go until the anchors in the drywall were firmly pressed back into place. "Hand me the level," I said, not bothering to look back. "Top of the toolbox in the hall," she said, panting. I didn't need her to do anything. I was already focused, already committed. This wasn't just about fixing her shelf. This was about something else I couldn't explain. She came back a second later with the yellow level in hand. I placed it on the shelf, checking for vertical alignment. The anchors in the drywall were cheap plastic. I could have told her that more cut corners, but instead, I just shook my head. "I'm going to anchor this properly," I said, securing the shelf in place. "It'll take me 10 minutes. Can you clear the bottom shelves?" Delilah didn't argue. She moved quickly, pulling books and pottery off the shelf. I watched her hands. No rings, short nails. There was something about the way she moved. So deliberate. Like she could put the world in order with just her touch. Once everything was cleared, I found the studs, hammered in the new screws, and stood back. "I think we're good," I said, brushing the sawdust off my shirt. But when I looked at her, I saw more than just relief in her eyes. There was something else, a kind of vulnerability that she tried to hide behind her usual smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking down at the floor, her shoulders sagging with the weight of the moment. "You didn't break it," I said, almost to myself. "It wasn't your fault." But she didn't look relieved. "I thought I could fix it myself," she said, almost as if she was speaking more to herself than me. "Plastic anchors and plaster," I said, walking past her. "It was bound to fail." She turned to face me, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and something darker. "It's just perfect timing, isn't it? Everything's falling apart at once." I was quiet, letting the moment hang between us. The apartment felt like a different place now, warmer and more chaotic than my own. I was used to bare walls, a place that smelled like sawdust and tools. Hers smelled like lavender and tension. "Is it the shop?" I asked, knowing that Moore had been squeezing everyone for higher rent. She shook her head. "No," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "Well, yes. Moore sent a notice this morning. He's reviewing the lease terms, and it's code for a rent hike I can't afford." She stopped, her eyes staring at the floor. But that's not the worst part. I waited, knowing she'd tell me when she was ready. "My parents are coming tomorrow," she said, her voice breaking. "They want to see the shop. They want to see where I live. They want to see that I'm not failing." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but she cut me off. "They think I am," she whispered. "I'm 38, Travis. I'm single. I rent. My business barely breaks even. My sister's got the perfect life. 3 kids, a house in the suburbs. I'm the one they worry about. The artsy one." Quote. She paced around the room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Then, with a deep breath, she faced me again. I told them I was fine. I panicked. I didn't want them to keep looking at me with that pity, so I lied. I paused, unsure what to say, my mind racing with questions. "What did you say?" "I said I was seeing someone stable, someone who made me happy." I could feel the weight of her words in the quiet of the room. I wasn't just hearing her story. I was being pulled into it. I crossed my arms, waiting for her to explain the rest. The silence stretched long between us. The words I'd just heard hung in the air like a thick fog. I didn't know how to respond. I had only just walked into her life today, fixing the shelf, but already I was tangled up in the mess of her world. She was standing in front of me now, her eyes searching mine as if she expected me to have some solution to all the chaos she'd just dropped at my feet. "You've got a fake boyfriend in Oregon?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She winced, the kind of wince that made it clear she regretted saying anything at all. She looked away, her gaze drifting to the window, where the rain was picking up again. "Yeah," she muttered. "I just panicked. They were asking too many questions. I didn't want them to think I was failing." "I'm not failing," she added, more to herself than to me, as if trying to convince herself of something she wasn't sure she believed. I shifted my weight, uncomfortable with the way my thoughts were twisting. I'd spent a year watching her. Hell, I'd seen more of her than I'd ever intended. There was something about her, something chaotic, something alive, like a flower that bloomed in spite of the storm. But now, she was standing in front of me, asking me to be part of a lie. "I'm not your fake boyfriend, Delilah," I said slowly, feeling the weight of the words even before I spoke them. "I'm just a neighbor with a toolbox." And I'm not about to get wrapped up in this mess. Her shoulders sagged slightly, but she didn't look defeated. She looked like she was making a decision, one I wasn't sure she had the courage to follow through on. "Please," she said, her voice small, the desperation creeping into her words. "I just need you to stand there. Pretend, just for a few days. They'll leave, and everything will go back to normal." I could see the panic in her eyes now. The way she was gripping her arms, like she was trying to hold herself together. I'd seen that kind of fear before. People who would do anything to avoid letting the world see the cracks, to avoid being exposed. "Delilah, you're asking me to lie. You're asking me to pretend to be someone I'm not, just so you can save face with your parents." She bit her lip, her fingers trembling. "I know it's crazy, but you're the only one I know who fits the description." She let out a shaky breath. "You're reliable. You help out with the building. You make me feel like I'm not a total failure." I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the weight of her words. "You're not a failure, Delilah. You've built something here. You're not a failure just because things are tough right now." Her eyes flashed with a mix of frustration and sadness. "You don't understand. They don't get it. They think I should be married by now, have kids, own a house. They look at me like I'm some kind of mess. And they don't see the work I put in every day. They don't see how much I care about this shop. I'm not just trying to make a living, Travis. I'm trying to make something that lasts." Her words hit harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time thinking I was the only one who understood the need for a foundation, for something solid beneath your feet. But maybe she got it too. Maybe, in her own way, she was building something that mattered. "Delilah," I started, my voice quieter now. "You don't need anyone's approval. Not mine, not your parents. You're doing it. You're keeping this place together, even when everything's against you." She didn't respond right away. She just stood there, her eyes locked on mine, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her emotions. I could see her fighting with herself, fighting the urge to break down and let the tears fall. But she didn't. She just held it in, a strength I couldn't help but admire. "I'm not doing this for the flowers or the free coffee," I said, my tone softening. "I'm doing it because I don't think you should be alone in this. If you need someone to back you up, to stand next to you when the world's judging you, I'll do it. But only if it's real. I won't pretend for anyone, not even for you." She blinked, like she hadn't expected me to say that, like she was waiting for a different answer. I didn't give her one. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll do it? You'll help me?" "I'll help you," I said, "but it's going to be on my terms. No lies, no pretending. You tell them the truth. I'm not your fake boyfriend. I'm just someone who wants to make sure you don't lose this place, Delilah. You've worked too hard for it to slip away because of some bad timing." She nodded slowly, the relief slowly creeping into her expression. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "Okay, no more lies. I'll tell them, but just, please, don't make this worse." I could tell she was already preparing herself for the fallout. She was bracing for her parents to take one look at me and judge everything. Judge her, but I wasn't going to let them. "So what now?" I asked, my gaze steady. "What's the plan?" She hesitated, biting her lip again before looking me in the eye. "You meet them, you show them she stopped herself, "that you're real, you're reliable, you're stable, and when they leave, we'll figure out the rest. We'll figure out how to make sure more doesn't ruin everything." I didn't know what it was about her. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, the way she refused to give in to the pressure. Maybe it was the fact that I couldn't just let her face everything alone. Either way, I knew I couldn't say no. "I'll be there," I said, "for the weekend. I'm not going to let them run you out of your own life." The words felt like a promise. And for the first time in a long while, I wanted to keep it. The next afternoon, the timeline suddenly accelerated. I was in the basement workshop, the one place I could escape to, surrounded by the smell of fresh wood and the soft hum of my sander. I was working on a walnut coffee table I was building for a client, the kind of project that made my hands feel useful, something to focus on. But then my phone buzzed on the workbench, and I glanced at it, wiping sawdust off my hands. It was Delilah. "They are here early. SOS." I stood still for a moment, staring at the message. My first instinct was to ignore it, to stay lost in my work. But then, something stopped me. Something about Delilah, about how she needed me to step into this role for her. To be there for her when the rest of her world was unraveling. I shoved the rag into my back pocket, wiped my hands on my jeans and grabbed my jacket. By the time I stepped out into the hallway, I could hear them. Their voices carried through the building, louder than I expected. "It's charming, in a rustic way," said a woman's voice, probably her mother. "But the water stayed on the ceiling." There was a pause. "Is that mold?" I could almost picture them, standing in the middle of the shop. Her parents had already arrived, and the act was about to begin. "It's not mold," Delilah's voice responded, a little too brightly. "It's just old plaster discoloration." Travis checked it. The name hung in the air like an invisible thread that would tie everything together. It was me, of course, the handyman, the boyfriend. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the counter, ignoring her parents for a split second before I turned to Delilah. She was standing behind the counter, looking a little tense, but mostly like she was trying to hold it together. When she saw me, her expression softened with relief, just barely, but enough to make it clear that I was the lifeline she was reaching for. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low, a little too calm, like I'd been doing this for years. I checked the humidity in the back. It's holding steady. No leaks. Her breath hitched slightly, and she managed to smile. "Oh, good. Thank you." I turned to her parents then, who were standing by the display of hydrangeas, their eyes scanning the room. Her mother looked at me first, her eyes sharp and assessing, the kind of look that didn't miss a detail. "Travis Gray," I said, extending my hand. "You must be Robert." Her father, Robert, looked at my hand for a moment, then up at my face. The handshake was firm, but his eyes didn't give away much. "Travis," Robert said, his voice low, "the boyfriend." That word hung in the air, the boyfriend. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "That's right." Susan raised an eyebrow, glancing between us. "Delilah talks about you." She eyed my clothes, jeans, t-shirt, a little sawdust on my shoulders. "You work on the building?" "I own a custom furniture business," I corrected gently. "I maintain the building in exchange for workshop space in the basement. Keeps my overhead low." "Furniture, huh?" Robert asked, crossing his arms. "High-end?" "High-end," I confirmed. "Walnut, cherry, white oak. No screws unless absolutely necessary. Hand-cut joinery." Quote. His eyebrows twitched up, a spark of interest in his eyes. Competence, recognized competence. "Well," Susan clapped her hands together, "we're about to head to dinner. Delilah made a reservation at that seafood place on the pier. You'll join us, of course." Delilah, standing by the counter, looked a little panicked. "Mom, he's probably dirty." "He has work." I cut her off before she could finish. "I'd love to," I said, nodding at her. "Give me 20 minutes to clean up. I'll be right downstairs." Delilah looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she nodded, exhaling in relief. She didn't have to pretend anymore. I walked toward her, my feet heavy on the floor, my eyes fixed on hers. As I approached, I reached out, brushing a smudge of pollen off her cheek with my thumb. Her skin was warm, soft to the touch, and when I made contact, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a split second, everything around us disappeared. The parents, the lie, the tension. It was just her and me, standing in the middle of the shop, both of us trying to ignore how real this moment felt. "I'll meet you downstairs," I said, breaking the moment before it could turn into something else. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she just nodded. I walked away, hearing her parents' voices in the distance. Dinner was an interrogation. They asked about my family, my education, my 5-year plan. I answered honestly. No degree. Carpentry learned from my grandfather. I'd saved up enough to buy a house, but I preferred the city. But then, Susan asked the question that almost made me choke on my water. "How long have you two been together?" she asked, spearing a scallop and looking at me with keen interest. Delilah opened her mouth, but I beat her to it. 6 months? I said smoothly. Officially, but we've been neighbors for about 2 years. 6 months? Robert mused. That's a while. Why haven't we heard about you? I kept my eyes on Delilah as I responded. I'm a private guy, I said, shrugging. Delilah wanted to make sure it was serious before introducing me. She respects your opinion. Quote. She laughed awkwardly, clearly caught off guard by my quick thinking. Delilah didn't want to bring someone home who wouldn't pass the inspection. I added, keeping my tone light. The words were so easy to say, so natural, as if I'd been telling people I was her boyfriend for years. Is it serious? Robert asked, leaning back. His eyes narrowed in a way that didn't exactly scream approval, but he was listening. I turned to look at Delilah. She was watching me, her eyes wide, the candlelight catching the sheen of sweat at her temple. She was gripping her glass so hard that her knuckles were white, and I could tell this was just as hard for her as it was for me. Yes, I said firmly. It is. The silence in the air felt heavier than before. Delilah relaxed just a little, but her shoulders were still tense. She didn't look at me, but I saw the relief slowly, almost imperceptibly, wash over her face. Well, Robert said, leaning back in his chair, we'll see. Actions speak louder than words. And just like that, the tension shifted. The night wore on, a quiet truce between us all. But as I walked Delilah back to her apartment later, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still ahead. The next few days blurred together like the rain outside her shop. I was in and out of Delilah's life like an actor playing a part, slipping into the role of boyfriend when her parents were around, and slipping back into the shadows when they weren't. Every morning, I'd show up for coffee before they woke, and we'd go over the plan for the day, who would say what, where we'd pretend to be, what little details we had to get just right. I'm allergic to penicillin, she whispered one morning, handing me a mug of coffee. I hate jazz. It's anxious music. I like history audiobooks. I raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of my coffee. You hate jazz? I hate it, she said, almost sheepish, but I think it makes me seem sophisticated. I laughed under my breath. Well, you've got that part right. You're the most sophisticated person I know who has a ridiculous amount of flower arrangements on display. Quote. She shot me a look, and I couldn't help but chuckle. Fine, I'm a snob, but you're still a nerd. She flushed, a real smile tugging at her lips. It felt like we were on the edge of something real. But we couldn't cross that line yet, not while her parents were still here. That Wednesday, her parents came by the shop again, and Susan had already started rearranging the displays when I walked in. Delilah was standing at the counter rubbing her temple, and it was clear that the stress was starting to take its toll. I could see it in her eyes. She was nearing the edge. And I didn't want to let her fall. I walked over and picked up a heavy crate of vases that Delilah was struggling with, moving it to the back of the shop. Susan, I said gently, trying to cut through the tension, the light hits better if you leave the space open like that. Delilah's got a great eye for negative space. Susan stopped mid-movement and frowned at the display. Oh, I suppose. Delilah's shoulders visibly dropped. I win, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else, her stress finally easing just a little. I didn't say anything. I wasn't here to win. I was here to keep this farce from crumbling around us. But the real test came Thursday afternoon, when I heard shouting in the shop. Not shouting, exactly, but stern voices projecting in a way that made my stomach twist. I was downstairs in my shop, getting lost in the grain of a new project, when I heard the raised voices. I quickly grabbed my jacket and made my way up to the shop. When I opened the door, I saw Xavier Moore standing in front of Delilah, his face flushed with his usual arrogance. He was waving a piece of paper at her, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. It's a standard inspection, Moore said, practically sneering. The city requires it for the renewal. If the wiring isn't up to code in the back room, I can't renew the commercial lease. Liability. Delilah's voice shook, but she stood her ground. You promised to update it last year, she said, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You said it was part of the plan. Moore waved his hand dismissively. I don't recall that, he lied. But the inspector is coming Monday at 9 a.m. If it fails, you're out by the 1st. Her parents were standing by the door, watching the interaction unfold like they were waiting for the show to end so they could get on with their day. Robert looked vindicated. Monday is fine, I said, stepping forward and blocking the doorway. Moore's eyes snapped to me, and for a second I could see the anger bubbling underneath the surface. Excuse me? Monday is fine, I repeated, my voice calm, because I rewired the back room 3 months ago. Remember when the breaker kept tripping? I took a step closer, leaning against the doorframe. I pulled the permits myself. Moore blinked, his expression faltering. You did? I did. I didn't look at Delilah. I knew she didn't expect me to know about the permits, but I did. I knew what was at stake here. I'll be here for the inspection to walk him through it. It's up to code, better than code. Moore narrowed his eyes. He knew I was lying, but he couldn't prove it. Well, I'll have the paperwork ready, he muttered. But the rent is going up 5%. Take it or leave it. 3%, I said, my voice low but firm. Or I report the unpermitted deck work on the 4th floor right now. Moore's face turned a shade of purple, but I didn't back down. Fine, Moore spat. 3%. I'll have the lease drafted by noon. You'll sign it then. Without another word, he stormed out, and the tension that had been choking the room lifted just a little. Delilah stood there for a moment, frozen. Her parents, who had been silent until now, exchanged a glance. Robert cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. You rewired the back room? Robert asked, sounding a little surprised. I keep my promises, I said, glancing at Delilah. She was still standing in the same spot, her hands pressed against the counter, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Robert nodded, but his eyes never left me. I suppose congratulations are in order, he said, though it didn't sound like a compliment. You get to stay. Delilah didn't answer. She was still processing everything that had just happened, her mind whirling with the sudden shift in power. I turned back to her parents. But, if I may, I said, taking a step toward them, there's one thing I want to clear up. Robert raised an eyebrow. What's that? Delilah's not going anywhere, I said. She's not leaving this building. Not for her parents, not for Moore, not for anyone. Delilah's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Doubt? I'm staying, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Not just for the shop, but because I want to see where this goes. For real. She reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly, and for the first time in days, I felt like we weren't pretending anymore. Her parents left an hour later, and we stood outside on the sidewalk, watching as their Lincoln merged into traffic. The rain had stopped, and a small patch of sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the wet streets. Everything's fine, Delilah said, her voice quieter now, but there was a certain finality to it. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't pretending. No more lies, I said, stepping closer to her. No more lies, she echoed. I could feel the weight of her words, the truth of them settling between us. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were standing on solid ground. The weekend passed in a blur. Delilah and I fell into a rhythm, slipping into the role of boyfriend and girlfriend with each new day. It was funny how easy it was to pretend when it didn't feel like pretending anymore. Her parents had left, the weight of their expectations lifted, and we were left with the aftermath of the lie we'd told to save her shop, and maybe a little bit of ourselves. I spent Saturday morning in her shop, helping her rearrange displays, picking out new flowers, and fixing little things that needed attention. Every now and then, I caught her glancing at me with a smile that felt more genuine each time. The tension had slowly begun to ease between us, and with every glance I could see her letting go of the facade she'd been holding onto for so long. You really know how to make a room come alive, she said one afternoon as we stood back and admired a new floral arrangement. I just know it looks right, I replied with a shrug, though there was more to it than that. I cared about how things looked, how they felt, how they stayed put, and didn't break under pressure. You've been working here for so long, she mused, glancing at the wall where the shelves I'd fixed stood solidly against the plaster. I guess you know everything about this building. I know a lot about this building, I said, watching her carefully. And a lot about you, too. She froze for a second, looking at me, but I couldn't tell if she was surprised or just processing the weight of my words. She was good at hiding behind that smile. But there was something else there now. Something that wasn't just about the facade she put up for her parents, or even for me. "Thanks for everything," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "You really saved me this week. I don't think I could have done it without you." "You're welcome," I replied, giving her a slight nod. But deep down I knew it wasn't just about saving her shop. It was more than that. It was about something we hadn't said yet, something that hung in the air every time we were together. The next few days were quieter, the constant tension of pretending slipping away. The lies that had been so carefully constructed felt like they were fading, replaced with something real. We started talking more about everything, our pasts, our goals, the kind of life we wanted. I didn't talk much about my past, but I did tell her about my grandfather and the way he'd taught me the value of building something that lasted. She seemed to get it, and I liked that. By Monday, the inspector came. Moore was there too, lingering in the background like he always did when he thought he could find something to use against her. But there was nothing. Miller, the inspector, gave everything the green light, and I watched Moore's face fall when he realized that I had done exactly what I said I would. Delilah's shop was safe, and with the lease renegotiated, she wouldn't have to worry about Moore squeezing her out anytime soon. I could tell it meant something to her, but she didn't show it. Instead, she kept her focus on the work, pushing through the stress like she always did. I couldn't blame her for that. She didn't want to let anyone see how much it all mattered, how much she had to lose. I understood. That evening, after the last of the paperwork was signed and Moore had finally slinked out of her life, we were left alone in her shop. The quiet felt different now, a little more peaceful, a little more real. "I think we did it," Delilah said, a hesitant smile pulling at her lips. "We really did it." "We did," I agreed, feeling the weight of the words. The shop was safe. She was safe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that maybe we were both a little safer than we'd been before. Delilah stood by the counter, her hands playing absently with a bundle of flowers. She didn't look at me, but I could tell she was thinking about something that had been on her mind for days now. She took a deep breath, then turned to face me. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The question was simpler than it seemed. She was asking if I was leaving her life, if I was going to walk away now that the crisis had passed. But it wasn't that simple. I wasn't sure what to say, what to promise. "I don't want to leave," I said finally, my voice lower than I intended. Her eyes flickered up to meet mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in them, something more than just the weight of the past week, more than the act we'd been playing. She stepped closer, the air between us thick with the unsaid things. "I don't want you to leave either," she said, almost too quietly for me to hear. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the reality of the situation pressing down on me. I had spent so much time keeping my distance, holding back, but now it didn't seem like I could anymore. There was too much between us now, too much that felt too real to ignore. She reached for me, her hand brushing lightly against mine. I didn't pull away. Instead, I closed the distance between us, letting the last of the tension break. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady. "I'm staying here. For you, for this." The words hung in the air, a promise I wasn't sure I was ready to make, but I knew I was, and it felt right. Delilah smiled. A real smile this time. Not the kind of smile she'd given when she was pretending. Her hand found its way to my chest, and for the first time, there was nothing between us. No more lies, no more pretending. I leaned down, brushing my lips against hers in a kiss that felt like the beginning of something new. Something real. When we pulled away, Delilah looked up at me, her eyes soft with something that felt like trust. "So we're really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, my hand finding the small of her back. "Yeah, we're really doing this." Quote. And for the first time, I realized that maybe this wasn't just about fixing broken things or holding up walls when they started to fall. Maybe it was about building something new, something real. The days that followed were like the quiet after a storm. Delilah and I settled into a new rhythm, not quite a routine, but something better. It felt less like we were pretending and more like we were building something real. The kind of thing that started with shaky foundations and a whole lot of uncertainty, but with each passing day it felt more like we were finally finding our footing. Delilah spent her mornings at the shop, tending to the flowers, arranging them with the same care and precision I'd come to recognize in her. I spent my time in the basement workshop, building, fixing, and doing what I loved. But now, when I worked, it didn't feel like I was just keeping busy. It felt like I was creating something that mattered, not just in the wood I shaped, but in the way Delilah's smile brightened when she saw me. The tension between us had melted away. The weight of the lie, the stress of the weekend with her parents, was slowly becoming just another part of the story we'd tell someday. It didn't feel like we had to pretend anymore. We were just us. And maybe that was all we ever needed. One afternoon, I found myself back in her shop, fixing a small issue with one of the displays. Nothing major, just a loose shelf that needed adjusting. Delilah was in the back, talking to a customer about custom bouquets for a wedding. Her voice was light, but I could hear the way it carried the same determination she always had. It made me think about how much she had fought for this place, for this life. I was tightening the screws when Delilah stepped out from behind the counter, a smile on her lips. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her hands were covered in fresh dirt from the flowers. There was something about her, something so genuine and warm, that I couldn't help but feel that this was where I was meant to be, right here, with her, amidst all the mess and chaos she'd kept hidden. "You know," she said, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped closer, "I'm glad you didn't run away after everything. I don't think I could have blamed you if you did." I paused what I was doing, looking at her. She was serious now, her expression softer than I'd seen it in a while. "I wasn't going anywhere," I said quietly, stepping toward her. "Not after everything. You were right. It wasn't just about fixing the shop. It was about making sure you weren't doing it alone." Her eyes softened, and I could see the faintest hint of a tear threatening to fall, but she quickly blinked it away, as if the emotion surprised her. "Thank you, Travis," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done more for me than I ever expected, and I don't think I could have made it through this without you. Not just for the shop, but—" She trailed off, her fingers curling into the fabric of her apron. "But for me." I reached for her hand, pulling it gently into mine, and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to thank me. I told you, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. For you." Quote. She smiled, and this time, it wasn't a forced smile. It was the kind of smile that felt like home. Later that evening, we went out for dinner. Just the two of us. No more acting. No more pretending. We sat in a little Italian restaurant by the pier, the kind with candles on the table and a view of the water. The conversation flowed easily, talking about everything and nothing. The kind of conversation you have when you're finally at peace with someone. No pressure, just real. As we walked back to the shop, the city around us quieter now. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a soft, purple sky. We walked slowly, side by side, with the familiar sound of our footsteps echoing on the pavement. Delilah stopped at the entrance to the shop, turning to face me. There was a question in her eyes, the kind that felt like she was weighing something important. "I meant what I said, you know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm staying here, not just for the shop, but for this, for you." I smiled, my hand reaching for her waist, pulling her close. "I know. I'm here for the long haul. We both are." And then there was no more space between us. I leaned in, kissing her gently, the kiss slow and lingering, filled with everything we hadn't said yet. But I knew then, without a doubt, that it was real. When we pulled away, she looked up at me, her eyes soft, her face a little flushed. "So," she said, her voice teasing, "am I the someone?" I smiled, my hand resting at the small of her back, grounding us both. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady and sure. "You're the someone." And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were finally where we were meant to be. No more lies. No more pretending. Just the two of us, building something real,